What I want to do is tell you that, or show that as we know more about how to shape ourselves, we have a challenge from within the sciences. And this is what I try to talk you through. As a German, I can say that there are several souls dwelling in my body. Well, you probably know that. And it's actually true if you look at what I want to talk about. So I run through a wide collection of ideas. I will introduce neuroplasticity in different life phases, so in children and in the elderly. I will argue that plasticity challenges neurocentrism in the strong sense, so that we are only our brains. So I take that as the strong sense. And then, as a completely different field, but still related, I will clear to consider the public in what we do here and in the labs. So I take the social climate as my starting point. We have ever more fields of neurocultures, and well, they range from neurotheology to neuropolitics. And I argue that this has an impact on everyday life for sure, and supposedly on our self-understanding. And I will focus on the second part in what comes now. So one of the hot topics in neuroscience, and we talked about that already, is something that really matters for our self-understanding. Brains are plastic, they change all the time, and we can change them purposefully. The associated suggestion that goes out to the public is, it's in our hands, we can and should benefit from the brain's alterability. So now what changes, and how can we lead us to that change? So what changes is easy, pretty much everything. Neuronal activity, neuronal structure, neuronal function, all of it changes. How can it be changed? By each purposeful intervention, and this is pretty much what we know from tons of studies now. So nutrition changes our brains, exercise, music, media, drugs, and all kinds of more technical interventions. But, and this is often not said, just life changes our brains all the time. So this is what Ted yesterday said, that this is all obvious and self-evident. But what I think is, so this is self-evident to everyone now because it's all communicated all the time, but that life just so influences our brains all the time is not that present outside, at least. So furthermore, there's fascinating evidence from epigenetics. I'm not a specialist there, but I just find it fascinating, and it fits in my line of argument somehow. So we see heritable changes in gene expression, and the expert sits over there. And examples for influences are, examples are the effects of early maternal care or the nutrition of parents on the mental condition of the offspring. So I think this is not only exciting from a public health perspective, but also with respect to neurocentric thinking. What does that mean for self-shaping? So what we get as a message is that we can influence our mental states, and we do that all the time, in fact. And now that we know better how we can do it, we can also control it. And this seems to be really a task for modern man, if you want to see. Self-shaping involves different goals, means, and motivations, and we need to understand all of them to better understand what the task of modernity is really when it comes to self-shaping. So self-shaping starts early on. Children are seen as projects that need to be optimally designed, really from very early on. A prominent and pretty real example is stimulant usage in children, so everyone knows about Ritalin. And here I think there's a clear and strong focus on self-shaping via brain shaping, because it's all about giving the kids the drugs to shape themselves, and they understand themselves as being shaped via their brains. There are many ethical issues arising, and we just had a position paper published on pediatric neuroenhancement, and we have a bunch of issues why we say at the moment it's not advisable to prescribe these drugs for enhancement purposes. Notably, and what is often underrepresented in the discussions, is that we really need to look beyond psychopharmacological interventions. So the context of the child, including nutrition, sleep, social interaction, matter tremendously for cognitive and affective states. And this sounds so trivial, because of course it matters, but if you go to the discussions about Ritalin, or Ritalin, people just don't look at that. And parents tend to focus on the psychopharmacological way as well. So the doctors with whom I did this paper, they said, well, they are surprised that we come with that easy task like, well, get sleep rhythm right, get proper nutrition, get social interaction right. So this is why I say, well, we have to look beyond psychopharmacology. So I jumped to self-shaping in high age. The pop science message here is your brain needs to be taken care of, and you have to do that. Give your brain a workout, consume your Ginkgo, as the German advertisement is telling us. So denken Sie auch an Ihr Gehirn. Remember that you have to remember your brain or remind your brain somehow. So Gehirn is brain, not mind. The train your brain discourse highly simplifies and opens a range of other ethical questions. So I just picked one here. I think when it comes to aging, we really have to rethink the discourse around successful aging, because there's much discussion coming from the plasticity debates about how we should age successfully, and I think this can be really a problematic turn, because successful aging can be a duty. So if you do not age successfully, it's your fault, and that's ethically, of course, problematic. But notably, in this sense, over to my next point, the effects of exercise on the brain and cognition do not occur independently of other lifestyle factors. And this is, again, it sounds trivial, especially for the people who are not so much into this discourse, but the relevance of social interactions, general life satisfaction, personality structure for the aging brain and for effects of, well, brain training programs and so on, they are often really underestimated. I'll argue that aging is not only about aging brains here, of course, but it's about the dynamic interaction of many factors, including all kinds of different lifestyle issues. So just an intermediate stop, and how I want to go on. There's no doubt that neuroplasticity allows self-shaping and makes us individuals. But we need to rethink the train your brain enthusiasm. First, because of ethical issues, as we all know, at least all people who are somehow familiar with neuroethics, but also, and the two causes interact, because neuroscience teaches us we are not our brains, we have our brains. So the alternative view that I want to suggest is seeing the brain not as an isolated physiological system, but part of an organism that perceives, feels, and acts in the world, thereby in turn always influencing immediately the brain back. So it's like understand it like a feedback loop. There's lots of evidence from the neurosciences. So we just mentioned studies on sensory motor coupling, so showing how closely coupled action and perception are, for example, and of course from neuroendocrinology, and probably everyone knows how strong cortisol or the thyroid hormones can influence mood and cognitive states. So this is not at all a new view, but something Feuerbach already said in the 19th century, but one that deserves new attention now that we know better. I suggest to give up borders between brain areas, between brain and skull, and between skin and environment. Those borders can be necessary assumptions in empirical practice, and they surely do, but they cannot serve as ontological basis or explanatory tool. So this is now just a small but still important appendix. That's the third soul in my breast. I think it's really important to study what the public thinks about these issues. So, and as I'm mostly interested in self-shaping, I had a small study on this. But what I want to say is that cognitive science really matters strongly for the public, and I find it really troubling that so few studies are out there that ask people what they want, what they fear, what they hope, what they think. So I did a little study in Germany, only around about 350 subjects, and we probe public attitudes in a German population, seeking to understand better what people really think about the potential impact the sciences have. So just 3 questions I ask. What influences your brain? And people think, and they are right with that, pretty much everything. So they come up with all kinds of things that they think is influential for their brains. And at that time I was mainly interested in enhancement, so I wanted to find out whether they frame their diets in enhancement terms, and actually they put pretty much everything they ever heard of as being healthy in a brain-centered discourse. So they say they take vitamin B because it helps their serotonin mirrors, things like that. So it was often wrong, so the way they explained it, but they put it in these terms. So ginseng, vitamin B, fish, coffee, of course, reappeared all the time. What I found more interesting was what they think about the potential to influence their mood or their emotions. And we asked, can you influence your brain to be more happy? And I found amazing that 62% said, yes, I can influence my brain to be more happy. And they come up with all kinds of different answers. And I like things like this. When someone said before, I said that one cannot change one's brain with one's own power or will. That's what he said before. But still I believe that there's much one can do. So that shows that they think there's something they should get from all this, also from the popular press about what helps their brains, what does not help, but they are somehow torn between what they should think. And the last thing, because responsibility, of course, is a huge issue, we asked them, do you think you have more responsibility because you know more how to influence your brain? And yes, rather yes, they answered, or yes, or rather yes, were together 74%. 75% said yes, they think they are more responsible now that they know better about the brain. And I think there's much to explore here, and I see this again as a crucial task for all of us. And there's no summary, just a thank you.